Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's a nice evening out. The no rain anticipated, and it's comfortable because I'm getting out later. The Thomas Jefferson report is that the temperature is 72, that the humidity is 42, and the wind's at 11 miles an hour, although I don't feel any of that here. The question we have day to day is, what terrible thing has happened that we know about, and how many other things that we don't know about have happened under the authority of Trump in the Oval Office. And we find out some things, and when we do find them out, the Department of Justice launches a leak investigation, and then finds out who they think may have done it, and even if it's not the one they did it, then they attack that person, and then they claim they're with the deep state. Sound like a lot of fiction? It's not. Now, we all know that the Alien Enemies Act has been front and center when it comes to how do we move migrants out of America. And Trump has decided to do that by saying that Venezuela is waging a war against us, and its instrument of invasion and conflict is a gang. Tren de Agua. Forgive me if my pronunciation is wrong. TDA, some are saying instead. So, here's how the sequence works. In order to invoke that act, several things have to happen. One is you have to be at war, as when it was invoked before, involving the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II. Okay, what is the war? There's no war. There's no war with Venezuela. So that's point one. Point two is there could also be a proper invocation of the act if there was some instrument of invasion working on behalf of Venezuela, say. And so they say, yeah, that's it, that's what we got going. So Trump has his tools clean up the findings that were made before he makes this pronouncement. What am I talking about? There is a finding in February 2025 that there is no connection between Venezuela and an invasion by a gang. And if you think about it, isn't a gang by definition at odds with the administration wherever you find them? A gang here is violating American law. What is a gang doing in Venezuela? Is it violating Venezuelan law? And then somehow or other, that gang goes to America to carry out the non-existing war that Venezuela wants? Now, you have not heard this analysis from anyone else. Why not? Why isn't that so obvious? Why isn't that the beginning and the end of the conversation? Do we practice dumbing down our understanding of the vehement violations of our Constitution and law? That we bear them in silence? That we tolerate them? That we put up with them? I guess so. So, in February 2025, a guy named Collins, who's in charge of these things, says there's no connection between Venezuela and these gangs. Now, in March 15 to be precise, Trump issues a statement, a pronouncement, which is required under the law, saying we are being invaded by a gang at the behest of Venezuela. And it's not true, because he's saying that in March, and it's not true. Now, on March the 20th, the New York Times discovers the earlier finding, intelligence finding, that there was no connection, and reports that Trump has contradicted the intelligence. So, King Tut Kent, that is to say, Kent is the fella that King Trump designates to clean up this mess. And how does Kent intend to do that? Well, he asks Collins to review the numbers, which is a signal to anybody with a 60 IQ that expects him to change it and support what the president said. But that's not what happens. Collins does a report, analyzes additional information, finds there is no real new information, and his earlier report stands for what it is. Now Kent, he wants to look at the draft of what Collins wrote so he can make a few edits. Well, then they change strategy again. Kent is excited that anyone would know the full story and says, well, yeah, let it be out there. And the Justice Department, they start an investigation into leaks. And Collins, who wrote the opinion in February, and then again after that, he's fired. He's fired. And the White House says, this is a deep state plot. So what do you do with something like that? There was no war. There's no connection to the gang. And yet, we act as if they are, and we're misrepresenting to the court what information we have. And the information we have is misleading to the court because it's untrue. It's not the information we actually have. Now, other administrations have done things like this. People die, bad decisions are made, but, remember the Maine. Well, we had a pretext for war. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution, pretext for war. Weapons of mass destruction, pretext for war. And here, it's a pretext to throw out of this country a person who is non-white because we have bigots in the White House. This is not complicated stuff. It really isn't. And you got to wonder, all the advanced degrees and all the intelligence on all the shows, TV, social media, all over the place, and they can't figure this out? This is not a Rubik's Cube. You can do this pretty easily, and you can do it in a two-step, but we don't do that. So what does that tell us? It tells us that security and leaks and these kinds of things are how the government keeps the truth from us so that we say, yeah, he's doing the right thing. The courts are wrong. No, the courts are right. Factually, they are absolutely right. Legally, they are absolutely right because of the facts. And they're finally absolutely right because no one has given them, that is the people that we would deport, their day in court. Charge them. You're an illegal alien, you're not allowed to be here, blah, blah, blah. Fact-finding. Answer. You got the wrong guy. Right here, I have a document that says I'm okay. That's what due process is. That's what fairness is. Now, you know how I feel about my favorite Roman senator, Seneca. He was an advisor to Nero. You may know that. And that's a precarious job. And Seneca was basically a lawyer, as was Cicero and so forth. And when Cicero came a cropper with Antony, Antony finally decided to cut off his head. And because he wrote the Philippics against Antony, cut off his hands, and Mrs. Antony was pissed off, and because he had also spoken with great vigor against Antony when his head was on a post outside Rome, she put a nail through his tongue. Okay, now how did Seneca make out? Well, Seneca was an advisor to Nero, and Nero at some point got upset with Seneca, and it was off with his head. So I much prefer to be a lawyer these days than then. So there we are. Now, but before Seneca's head was cut off, he wrote one of his writings was called On Mercy, okay? And it was directed to Nero, which tells you something. And I'll try to check I don't remember the dates, but the sequence seems obvious that, well, first of all, we know it was before he cut off his head, right? So one of the things that he wrote, Nero, and maybe this sped up the disapproval of Nero, who was not himself, if you will, but he wrote to him, no one can wear a mask long. The false lapses fall off. and the person returns to his original nature. So who is that of Trump? Who would disagree with me that he is hopelessly cruel? Period. Almost everything springs from that. He's got more madness and terrible things going on inside of him. Talk about a dark, dark soul and an abyss of pain and suffering. So Trump is breaking down the distinction between the bad and the good. And once those things are removed, the result is confusion, and we suffer an epidemic of vice. That's where we are now. At every turn, every day, somewhere, publicized or not, Trump is tearing away at the fiber, the bone, the blood, the sinews of our nation. And that is his objective, and he knows he's doing it. And any announcer who goes around saying, well, maybe he's doing this, maybe they should be fired, every goddamn one of them, because they're not reporting what is happening. And Germany learned from this. Other nations have learned from this. The Italians were pretty pissed off when they had to deal with Mussolini. They took him to task. And I'm not proposing any of those things. I'm proposing we peacefully take back our government and give the foot in the big hindquarters of Trump and his vice president and get on with the government of our nation as it was intended and as it must be. Now, if you want an example of how insane a religious belief system can be and what pain the insanity does bring to families and the public, consider the pregnant woman in Georgia who is brain dead, has been forcibly kept on life support for 3 months over the objections of her family. And the family opposes the government's decision to keep her alive until this pregnant woman may or may not be able to be relieved of her dying responsibility to the fetus within her. Have you ever heard anything more cruel? Who's paying for it, by the way? Government's not picking up the price. And so this is an example of what happens when Trump gets to appoint justices to the Supreme Court and they overrule a 50-year statute that provided for the right of a woman bearing a child or a fetus or a fecundated ovum to have control over her own body. There is not a person in that family that thinks that she would choose this. And they are miserable because of the fiction that a life begins the moment the idea occurs, which is about the same place where a fecundated ovum is. One sperm made it through, bang. And how many of those become a child? Few. Not as many as perhaps the Christians want. And one of the problems about the world is we already have too many humans here, and we have no restraint on our willingness to generate up to and including the environmental terrors that we face because we have no intelligent constraint on who we are and what we do. I think it was Dawkins wrote a book called The Selfish Gene, meaning individually we would take care of ourselves rather than use our minds to do something that is more generally acceptable in the community of humans. But there we have it. And then I have one final beef that comes to my mind, and that is, if you go to a university these days and you're in some programs, I like to think only among more inferior schools, they may direct the students that they can't use AI to fulfill assignments or chat GPT. But the professors and the assistants are doing that. There was a protest by a woman at Northeastern University saying, this is outrageous. I open it up and I see even the reference to chat GPT inside the document and the charts and so forth. What am I paying for? I'm paying somebody to do an analysis with AI, and they're not giving me, presumably, some experience that they're supposed to have to inform I, the inexperienced, uninformed person who have an appetite to become as smart as I can in this or that field of endeavor in advanced learning. And so she asked for her money back, and she has since graduated from Northeastern, but they didn't give her money. And the professors run around explaining how, oh, we should be able to do this. No, it's not. It's a form of plagiarism, if you will, because you're copying other works and synthesizing it and giving it without disclosing where it came from. And, yes, there are better programs that make it open that they're doing that. But that's not what this is about. And we heard about lawyers in Lower Manhattan that keep ahead of their assignments by using AI to do the research. Oops. And so, what do we have in America? Do we know the difference between good and bad? You and I do. I believe this. I believe that everyone who hears what I'm saying, because we've been doing this a while, and we chose to talk to each other, we know what's going on. And how do we expand the understanding and the legitimate fear that we must change what's going on in this nation because we're at risk as a republic. And that puts in danger our freedom and our equity to each other. And that's what's at stake, nothing less. It's amazing, for years politicians say the most important election there ever was for persons other than the candidate. And here we are now. It's absolutely true. And unless the politicians make it a bread and butter issue about dollars and cents instead of individual rights and liberties, because they don't understand. They are the same thing. And so that's where we are. So another thought I had, I don't know if you remember this, there was another disaster involving a woman who's brain dead from 1990. And they kept her alive until 2005. Schiavo was the last name, Schiavo. And they wanted to keep her alive because someday she might come back. And a prominent senator, whose name has escaped me right now, U.S. Senator, he said he saw in one of the tapes that her eyes moved following balloons. Well, when she did die, by an order of the state court, at a time when Congress was trying to write a law to prevent her being taken off the equipment that allowed her to sit there as a vegetable, when they did the autopsy, they found her brain had shrunk into half size. There was no way she could ever have recovered. This is what our government does. People believe crazy shit, and then they do this to us. Like they know better, and they don't. I have a history with these pain cases, chronic pain patients who, without the pain medication, and it's not for everyone, yes, but it's for an awful lot of people who are in terrible pain and would decide to commit suicide when they can't get any surcease from the pain they feel. And again, the government's messing into that. Now, I'm not a person who's afraid of the government per se, but when it gets it wrong and it doesn't know, in the words of that great American philosopher Clint Eastwood, the government should know its own limitations. He actually said a man ought to know his own limitations. So that's what I got for today. I say good evening to you from my Cathedral of Trees, and I'll be out here tomorrow, I suppose. Bye-bye.